Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Emerald Ash Borer informational meeting. We're holding this meeting due to the recent find of emerald ash borer in Itasca County. I am Jonathan Ostis with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Plant Protection Division. I am the Emerald Ash Borer Technical Assistance Coordinator, and I'm going to go through a broad overview of emerald ash borer, the host trees, how to recognize symptoms, the known distribution, regulations, management, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. Please, if you have any questions at any point, put those questions into the chat as we go along. My colleague with me is Jennifer Burrington. She'll be putting links in the chat along with helping with questions as we go along. I will be recording this meeting, so it will be available on the MDA's YouTube channel within a day or two after this, or by the early next week. So if you know of anybody that was unable to attend today, you can direct them to MDA's YouTube channel and they'll be able to find a recording of the meeting. With that, I'm going to get started. So just once again, here's the agenda for the presentation. It'll be around 45 minutes with times for question and answers at the end. And please put questions in the chat as we go along so we can answer them as we go or have them listed at the end to go over. So I'll go ahead and get started and just give a little background on emerald ash borer. So emerald ash borer is a metallic wood boring beetle. It's not native to North America, and its native range is parts of Eastern Asia, so parts of China, the Russian Far East, North and South Korea, parts of Japan and Taiwan. It likely arrived sometime in the early to mid 90s in the Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario area. So it is believed that it was brought in through solid wood packaging material into the ports there. And it went unnoticed for many years until 2002 when it was identified in Detroit, Michigan initially. And so at that point, that population had time to build up and start causing lots of tree mortality. And so by the time they identified it, there were thousands of dead and dying ash trees throughout that Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario area. So lots of ash nursery stock and infested firewood had moved out to new locations, kind of kicking off that rapid spread of the insect throughout North America. You now fast forward to 2025. It's now been found in 38 states and 5 Canadian provinces. It's throughout much of the native range of ash in North America. It's throughout most of the eastern half of the U.S., and it's starting to pop up in states in the West. So it was first identified in St. Paul, Minnesota in 2009, and we are now at 59 counties out of 87 in Minnesota that have known infestations of emerald ash borer. All right, so I'm now going to go over the life cycle of the insect. So it's important for understanding how we deal with this insect. We have what we call the active season and the inactive season. So right now we are in the active season for emerald ash borer. We're in the flight season, so where the adult beetles are out flying around and finding new trees to infest. So basically, the emerald ash borer life cycle, they begin emerging once it's gotten warm enough in the late spring or early summer, depending on where you are in the state. We use growing degree days to track when that initial emergence will be. So basically, once we reach 450 growing degree days with a base temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, we get initial emergence of the insect. So in the southern half of Minnesota, that's usually in mid to late May. And in northern Minnesota, that tends to be in more mid to late June, depending on where you are and how quickly things heat up in the spring and early summer. So right now, the beetles are out actively flying around. So once they emerge from a tree, they do a little bit of maturation feeding in the canopy of the tree on the leaves. This is not something that you notice with the naked eye. It's not like Japanese beetle and how they skeletonize a leaf. So they do a little bit of that maturation feeding for a couple days. Then they go and find a mate. They mate, and then once they mate, they begin laying eggs in the bark cracks and crevices of the ash trees. And the insects initially infest an ash tree in the mid to upper canopy. So they're going to first lay their eggs on those branches between 2 to 6 inches in diameter, where that bark has transitioned from smooth to rough. And so they then work their way down the tree. The average female beetle lays between 60 and 90 eggs. So you can see how that population can start to build quite rapidly. And the adult beetles themselves aren't alive for all that long. I think they average a little more over 30 days that they're alive for, between 30 and 50 days. Um, and so it's really the larvae that hatch from the egg that do the damage to the tree. So once those eggs are laid in those bark cracks and crevices, they then hatch within a week or two. And then those small larvae begin tunneling underneath the bark in that cambium layer of the tree. So that's what does the damage to the tree. It's the larval tunneling that disrupts the flow of water and nutrients between the root system and the crown. And so once they're in that larval stage, they then go through what we call larval instars, which is just growing stages or sizes. They go through 4 larval instars before they then chew a pupal chamber, as you can see in that center picture where it's folded in half. At that point, they're done doing the damage that they're going to do to the tree, and they chew that pupal chamber either about a 1/4 inch into the sapwood, or in large mature trees with thick bark, they'll do that in the bark as well. And then they'll overwinter, and then the next spring and summer when it heats up, it'll pupate, turn into the adult beetle, and emerge from the tree and start that process all over again. So what I just explained there is a 1-year life cycle. We have both a 1-year and 2-year life cycle for this insect in Minnesota. And the further north you go, the more you get a 2-year life cycle. To give you an example of that 2-year life cycle, so emerald ash borer eggs that were laid in the summer of 2024 began larval development, overwintered as immature larvae underneath the bark. This summer, they are continuing their development and will eventually make it to their pupal chamber, and they will overwinter a second time as a pre-pupa, and then emerge as an adult beetle the following summer of 2026. So you can have any immature larval stage underneath the bark at any time of year due to that 2-year life cycle, which is important for things like transporting firewood, where you can have stuff emerge, well after, over a year after it was cut. So that's what makes firewood so dangerous. The adult beetles themselves, they are okay flyers. They can fly, several miles, but most of them will reinfest the same tree or a tree right next to it. Most of them don't go more than 100 meters from the tree they emerge from. It's just a small percentage of that population that will strike out longer distance to start new infestations. All right, so that's the life cycle. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but how emerald ash borer kills trees, it's really the number of insects that infest a tree that overwhelms the tree and eventually girdles the tree and kills the tree. So a small number of emerald ash borer infesting a tree, an ash tree can handle that. It's really once you start to get hundreds and even thousands of insects in a tree that it eventually kills the tree. And so with females laying between 60 and 90 eggs apiece, you can see how that population starts to build quite rapidly. And then, on a large mature tree, you eventually have thousands of insects that build up in that tree and essentially girdles the tree. This is also why the insect starts in the upper canopy of the tree and works its way down. If it were to start on the trunk of the tree, it would girdle the tree much faster and kill that food source that they depend on to complete their life cycle. So, and the reason emerald ash borer is a real issue is that exponential growth in population. So when populations are first getting started, they grow slowly at first, but eventually they kind of hit this exponential growth. And then within a few years of that population explosion, you have widespread mortality of ash trees. So that's really what overwhelms communities' ability to deal with dead and dying trees that happen in a relatively short amount of time. And so, what we found in many areas, the emerald ash borer, once it gets established, will kill the majority of mature ash trees within a 12 to 15-year time period. That may be a bit slower the further north you go, as you have more in the 2-year life cycle and you have a little bit higher cold mortality, but it's still going to reach those tree killing levels. And part of the reason why this happens is because our North American ash trees did not co-evolve with the insects, so we don't have that natural or native resistance to it, and we don't have the natural enemies to help keep those populations in check. All right. So that's how it works. That's the life cycle and how it kills trees. So up next are the host trees. So emerald ash borer attacks all true ash. So anything in the Fraxinus species. Mountain ash is not true ash, and so it's not a Fraxinus species. It won't attack that. So we have 3 types of ash that are native to Minnesota. We have green ash, black ash, and white ash. Ash trees have opposite branching. They have compound leaves and 5 to many leaflets, depending on whether it's a green ash, white ash, or black ash. Oftentimes, like pictured here is a green ash tree. This is what you find most commonly planted in yards and right-of-ways and in windrows. They have that kind of diamond-ridged bark, as you can see in the pictures there. And then you can see in the picture on the right, those are green wraps that have information on emerald ash borer that a lot of communities will put around trees in public parks to draw attention so people can recognize what ash trees look like. And that way it may spur them to realize that they have them in their yard and they may have to deal with that. So host trees in Minnesota, like I was saying, we have black ash, green ash, and white ash. Those are all highly susceptible to emerald ash borer. And so when emerald ash borer gets established in an area, it's typically been a 98, 99% mortality rate for the mature ash trees there. And so we have black ash found in 2/3 of the states, and we have a lot of that is concentrated in north central and northeastern Minnesota, where we have large swaths of black ash forest in these kind of wetland areas, or very wet forested sites where black ash is the main thing that can grow there. And then we have green ash, which is found out through the entire state, and that's a common forest tree and floodplain forest as well. But it's also the most commonly planted in boulevards, parks, right-of-ways, windrows, and things like that. Green ash was often used as a replacement tree after Dutch elm disease came through in the 70s and 80s and wiped out a lot of our mature elms. A lot of people replanted with green ash. And then white ash, we have some pockets of native white ash in the eastern and southeastern part of the state and more upland areas, but it's also a common yard tree or boulevard tree as well. Just to mention as well, there is a secondary host called the white fringe tree it's not native to Minnesota, but it can be bought as an ornamental tree. It's a smaller shrub. It's native to the more mid-Atlantic and southeastern part of the U.S., but it is available for purchase at nurseries throughout much of the state. So if you're looking for a new ornamental shrub to put in your yard, we just suggest not purchasing the white fringe tree. Emerald ash borer can complete its life cycle, and it's not a preferred host, but once there's no more ash in an area, it can move to that. All right, so how to recognize emerald ash borer itself. So how to confirm an infestation. So the number one way to identify an emerald ash borer infestation is by finding that S-shaped feeding gallery. So that is what the larva tunneling underneath the bark, that's the shape it makes when it's doing its tunneling. So it's a very distinct look. It has that tight S shape, that back and forth feeding pattern. That is the only insect in ash that will make that feeding pattern. So if you find that S-shaped feeding gallery in an ash tree, you know it is indeed emerald ash borer that is causing that. Um, in addition to that, so that is the best way to usually identify emerald ash borer. You can see it in a wood-pecked area, or where the bark is split open or bark has come off. You can find that S-shaped feeding on the surface of the wood, in between the bark and the surface of the wood. And then there's the emerald ash borer larva itself. If you pull an insect larva out of an ash tree, what you want to look for are the what we call Urogompi, and you can see in that picture circled on the right, upper right, is two little spine-like projections, two little black pincers at the tail end of the larva. If it has those two spine-like projections and you pulled that larva out of an ash tree, you know it is indeed emerald ash borer. We have other insects that have one of those, or they have none of them. But if you have two black like pincers at the tail end of the larva, you know it's emerald ash borer if you pulled it out of an ash tree. Third, there is the adult beetle itself. Now, this, early on in infestations, you don't typically see the adult beetle very often. They're usually up in the canopy of the tree, not usually at eye level in many places. It does happen, but it's not as frequent. But they are very distinct looking. They're about a half-inch long by about an eighth-inch wide, and they have those bright iridescent green wing covers along with that kind of deep magenta colored abdomen. So it is very distinct looking, but there are a number of insects that are commonly confused that also have that bright iridescent green color that I'll show you after this. And then lastly, they do leave a D-shaped exit hole when they exit the tree. This is distinct for emerald ash borer in an ash tree. So I will say this, while that is indicative of emerald ash borer, there are other exit holes from other insects that are oval shaped that can kind of look D-shaped. And if you're looking for an eighth-inch wide hole on a large mature tree, good luck. That's it's going to take you a long time to find it. And if you can easily find exit holes at eye level, if you were to look up in the tree, you would notice a lot of other damage that would let you know that that tree is infested far earlier before you ever see those exit holes at eye level. So really what you want to be looking for is that S-shaped feeding gallery on the surface of the wood if you find, woodpecker damage and things like that in those areas, which I'll go over here in just a moment. All right. Well, along with that, here are some of the insects that are commonly confused with EAB. So you can see emerald ash borer circled there in the upper left. Like I said, it's about a half-inch long by about an eighth-inch wide. It's not all that big. But the most commonly confused insect with emerald ash borer is down in the bottom right, and that is the six-spotted tiger beetle. And so it has that bright, looking at the picture side by side, it's got a very different shape, but it's got that bright iridescent green color, and people often see them in late May and in June and early July. It's a ground nesting beetle. It's very quick, and so you'll see this bright green beetle run across your deck or your sidewalk or something, and that usually catches people's eye. So that is the one most commonly confused. And also we get a number of reports of the flat-headed apple tree borer and, the Buprestis metallic wood-boring beetle as well. All right. So signs and symptoms, the things you want to look for to try to detect emerald ash borer as early as possible in your trees. This is what we look for. And the number one thing is woodpecker damage. So woodpeckers love to feed on the late instar larvae underneath the bark. So the larger larvae right before they get into their pupal chamber, that is a great food source for woodpeckers. And so they leave kind of a very distinct look compared to, insects, or woodpeckers will go after other insects in the trees as well. But when they're going after emerald ash borer specifically, they leave a kind of distinct look. So you'll see patches of what we call blonding or bark flaking, where the woodpeckers have flecked off some of that outer bark, creating these blonde patches. That just tells you where to look. So, squirrels can cause this sometimes and different things, branches rubbing and different things like that. That blonding just gives you a focal point. You want to look for these kind of shallow, dime-sized, light-colored, oval-shaped woodpeck holes in those blonded areas. So when woodpeckers are going after emerald ash borer larvae underneath the bark, they're going just deep enough to get to the larva. So they leave these shallow woodpeck holes, as you can see in these pictures right here. And, if you're looking to try to find it early, you want to be looking up into the canopy and those branches that are between 2 to 6 inches in diameter. And typically this is going to show up on the south or southwest facing side of the tree first. The part of the tree that gets the most amount of direct sunlight. That's where emerald ash borer tends to lay their eggs first. And so just to give you more examples of what that might look like, you can see in that picture on the left there, that's a green ash tree. That you can see those blonded patches, and then within those blonded areas, you have these shallow woodpeck holes. Oftentimes, when you see that, if you have a good pair of binoculars, woodpeckers will kind of knock off enough of that bark to where you can actually see part of that S-shaped tunneling pattern on the surface of the wood within that woodpecked area. That picture in the center, although a little grainy, that is a black ash tree, so you can see the color of the bark is a little bit different from green ash. But obviously, it has that bark flecking and those shallow woodpecks within those areas. And then a picture on the right is another green ash in a park that is heavily infested with emerald ash borer. When a tree is heavily infested, eventually you see woodpecker damage all the way down to the ground, and then the bark begins to fall off. Another thing you want to look for that's are a little bit more cryptic and a little bit harder to spot, but once you know what to look for, you might be able to see them, are bark splits. So when emerald ash borer first infests a tree, the tree tries to heal around that feeding gallery, that wound, and it starts to build up callus tissue. And as that tree continues to grow, that bark separates from the surface of the wood and creates a nice split in the bark, where you can often see that S-shaped tunneling pattern on the surface of the wood within that bark split. The bark splits can look a little bit different depending on the tree, and so it's not one size fits all, unfortunately. Some are a little bit more slender like that, where you can kind of see the galleries in that picture on the right. And then sometimes they look like this. So that picture on the left, you can see those long vertical cracks all the way up that main stem on the picture on the left. And then even in that picture on the right, in the center of the image, you can kind of see a little bit of a split, but if you look up to the top center of that image, you can actually see a more developed bark split where you can actually see part of that S-shaped tunneling pattern in that little split area. So like I said, it can be kind of cryptic in nature, but it's something to look for. And lastly, canopy thinning. So when emerald ash borer is attacking a tree, oftentimes that canopy decline will lag behind that woodpecker damage a little bit. It just depends on the condition of that tree to begin with and whether the woodpeckers in the area have found that food source. But overall, what you're going to see is an overall thinning of the canopy. There'll be fewer leaves, smaller leaves, more light penetrating through, and that starts in the upper part of the canopy. And oftentimes you'll see what looks like in that picture on the right, where you get that really thinning of the upper canopy, and then you get a lot of water sprouts or epicormic sprouting lower down on the main stem of the tree, creating that kind of bushy-like appearance. So that means that tree is stressed. It's trying to put out energy, so it's putting out new shoots lower down in the tree where it can still get the nutrients and energy to. And so oftentimes it'll look like that. And now just the general symptom progression. So this is on average. It can take a little bit longer if the infestation area is just building, or it can go a little bit faster if you're in a really heavily infested area with high insect pressure. So on average, it takes about 5 years for emerald ash borer to kill a tree. And so in that first year, you have small larvae present underneath the bark. There are no symptoms, outward symptoms on the tree that would let you know that it's infested. To identify emerald ash borer in that first year of infestation, it really takes what we call branch sampling, which involves removing 2 3-foot sections of branch from the mid to upper canopy of the tree and then peeling the bark off with a draw knife to look for insect tunneling. And this is still only 70 or 75% effective at finding emerald ash borer in asymptomatic trees. So it's really, once you get to year 2, you have more emerald ash borer present in the tree. That's when you might have some woodpecking possible, and it'll just be on a couple branches. You'd have to be looking very closely to identify it in this point. So this is why we do all of our survey that we do in the wintertime when the leaves are off the tree, so you can get a clear look into the upper canopy of the tree, and you can identify these woodpeck holes in those areas it's likely to show up first. So in that mid to upper canopy on the southwest facing side of the tree. In that second year of infestation, you're still likely to not really see much for canopy decline, especially to the average person, the average homeowner. You're not going to notice anything in that year 2. Same with year 3. That's when woodpecker damage is very likely. You might see bark splits as well. Each year you have more emerald ash borer building up in that tree. It's usually by year 3, the woodpeckers have found that food source, and they're going to start to show you where it is. So once again, if it was an otherwise healthy tree in your yard before emerald ash borer arrived, your canopy will still likely look pretty good, but you may be starting to see a little bit of thinning. So to a really trained eye, you might notice that. But it really isn't until year 4 of infestation where those canopy impacts are really visible. And at that point, you're likely going to see a lot of woodpecker damage further down on the tree, maybe coming down onto the trunk of the tree, and it becomes much more obvious that there's something wrong with the tree. Going from that year 3 to year 4 is often when a tree goes from potentially treatable with insecticide to stop the infestation where it's at to an untreatable tree. So I'll go over it more a little bit later, but you need at least 70% of a healthy canopy for that tree to be a good candidate for insecticide treatment. And then as you know, get into years 5, year 6, that tree is dead and on its way out. So it's important to note that ash trees do become quite dry and brittle and hazardous quickly after they die. Ash trees tend to fall apart rather quickly, and so it can really increase the cost if you wait till that tree is completely dead. If the ash tree is located next to your house in your backyard or someplace where it can fall and damage property. So you want to deal with it before that tree is completely dead if it's in a location where it could fall and damage things. All right, so that's the progression of symptoms. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the known distribution within Minnesota. So this is the known distribution. Right here, I have a picture of our emerald ash borer status map. So this is updated nightly with new confirmed locations. Now, it doesn't have every single tree that's been reported and confirmed, but you know, when that's why we have what we call the generally infested layer. So you can see the URL posted at the top. I encourage anybody, if you're ever wondering where emerald ash borer has been confirmed, please check this map. And if you know of it in a place where it's not being shown on this map, please report it to us. We depend on knowledgeable people to report new infestations. And so the thing to note about this map, it shows where quarantine counties are. So the outlined in red there, that's the quarantine area that restricts the movement of ash, hardwood, firewood, and mulch from the quarantine area to a non-quarantine area. And then in addition to that is the generally infested area. So that's that green polygon layer that is a buffer around confirmed points. So we do that generally infested area. So it starts at a 2-mile buffer. The average spread rate of emerald ash borer is around 2 miles a year. And so given the cryptic nature of the insect where you don't see, symptoms of infestation until that tree has been infested at least 2 or 3 years, emerald ash borer is always spread further beyond what you can physically see in the environment. So we're trying to better represent where emerald ash borer is and impacting trees by having that buffer around confirmed infested tree locations. So the way to think of it, if you are within a generally infested area, there is a high probability that your tree is already being impacted by emerald ash borer at some level, whether it's showing symptoms or not. And so that's how the generally infested area works. And in general, if you are within about 10 miles of a generally infested area, that's the time when you want to start considering whether you want to treat any trees or not, and to start thinking about how you're going to deal with emerald ash borer when it gets to your property. If you have a lot of ash trees, if you need to thin out, start planting something new to take its place, if they're your main shade trees. So those kind of questions. But really, here's the where it was found in Itasca County. So it was found on Pokegama Lake on that Wendigo Arm in the far southeastern portion of the lake. So that's about 5 or 6 miles south of Grand Rapids. It was found on a property there. As you can see, there's already infestations over near Reamer and Hackensack, Minnesota. And it was recently found back in February up in Virginia, Minnesota. So there's new locations popping up all the time. We know it's further beyond what we have mapped at this point. So we really encourage people, if you think you found emerald ash borer in a new location, please report it to us, and I'll give you information on how best to report at the end of this presentation. And so, as you can see, a good portion of that area around that southern portion of Lake Pokegama is considered generally infested. All right. So now regulations for the state. I'm going to go over. So there is emergency quarantine put in place due to the find of emerald ash borer in Itasca County. And so the regulations, the purpose of them are to reduce or eliminate the spread of a pest through human-assisted movement. So people moving ash logs or firewood that are potentially infested to a non-infested area. Like I mentioned, emerald ash borer itself is, on average about a 2 miles per year spread rate. It's really through human assisted movement that this pest has moved much quicker and faster than it would on its own. That's why you get these large 50-mile jumps, or say in the case it just showed up outside Portland, Oregon the other year. So that's, it was a 1,000-mile jump from the nearest infestation in Colorado. It just really drives home how much people are moving this insect around, and it's spreading it much faster than it would otherwise. And so the purpose of the quarantine is to try to reduce or eliminate that aspect of spread, and while still facilitating trade for the people that depend on those products for their livelihoods. And so we have two types of quarantines in Minnesota. We have an internal quarantine. Those are the counties that are quarantined within the state that we restrict the movement from those quarantine counties to those non-quarantine counties. And then we have an external quarantine, which doesn't allow the movement of those regulated materials from out of state into Minnesota or from Canada into Minnesota. So those are the two types of quarantines that we have. And so the regulated articles that are regulated for these quarantines are any ash material, any emerald ash borer life stage, and mulch. So a lot of mulch doesn't meet the specifications to be considered pest-free. It takes a tub grinder to get wood chips down to a size to where it would be considered pest-free. It needs to be 1 inch by 1 inch or less than 1 inch by 1 inch in 2 dimensions to meet that criteria, which typically takes a tub grinder. And then we regulate all hardwood firewood firewood is considered anything 4-foot lengths or less. And we do all hardwood firewood because the average person cannot tell the species of wood in a cut pile of firewood. And so that is why. And, besides emerald ash borer, this is just a pathway for other pests and diseases to be spread throughout the state much faster than they would otherwise. And so this is just kind of showing the pictures of the different types of regulated articles. We have the firewood, split or not, ash logs, and mulch. All right, so what that movement of regulated articles means. So we use this graphic. We have the red arrows, which means stop, don't move. So from Canada, you can't be moving firewood or ash logs or mulch into the state without a compliance agreement, which would go over what process is being taken to ensure that you're not accidentally spreading emerald ash borer into a new area. Wood can't be coming in from North Dakota or South Dakota. And then we have the green arrows, which say you're free to move within these areas. So you are free to move any of these regulated articles within the contiguous quarantine area. So that entire quarantine area. So much of the eastern and southern half of Minnesota is you're free to move all these regulated articles within it because those are all within infested counties. And then you have that yellow arrow, which means caution. You can only transit. So if you're starting in a non-quarantine area and your destination point is another non-quarantine area, you are allowed to transit the quarantine. You just aren't allowed to do any sort of overnights with that wood material. Once you do an overnight with that wood material, it is now part of the considered quarantine material, a regulated article, and you're not allowed to move it out of that quarantine area. If you have a business and you need to move regulated articles from a quarantine area to a non-quarantine area, you can get a compliance agreement with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, which is going to outline the steps you have to take to ensure that you're not accidentally spreading emerald ash borer to a non-infested area. And so those types of treatments that would be required are that chipping and grinding a mulch to 1 inch by 1 inch and less than 2 dimensions, complete debarking of the wood, so plus a 1/2 inch of sapwood to ensure that you've removed any potential insect stage. You can compost, heat treatment. So we have a number of certified firewood dealers in the state that heat treat their wood. That's making sure that the wood reaches a core temp of 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes. and then with the kiln dried lumber or fumigating. So depending on what you're trying to do, those are kind of the options available to you for a compliance agreement if you need to move regulated articles out of quarantine. And just as a reminder, firewood, the definition of firewood is wood cut to lengths less than 4 feet long. So if you have a maple tree that you want to move, if you can keep it in sections longer than 4 foot lengths, it is not regulated because you can easily tell the species of wood that way. And then firewood is split or not, whether it's for commercial or private use, and it's all hardwood species. And just another reminder, firewood movements, it cannot enter from Canada or other states, cannot leave the Emerald Ash Borer quarantine, and it cannot leave the spongy moth quarantine, which is in Lake and Cook counties. Those are quarantined for the different forest pests, spongy moth. Firewood can move around inside of the pest quarantine, so it can move freely within that contiguous quarantine area. It can move freely outside of the quarantine, and it can move freely throughout the entire state if it is a certified firewood, which means it's been treated in a way to ensure that it's pest-free. And you'll see that logo there in the bottom right, the certified logo on the label of the firewood if it has been certified. Oftentimes you'll find that type of wood at big box stores or gas stations and things like that. We have 12 or 13 of those firewood dealers throughout the state. If you have questions on the quarantine, or if you want to submit a comment about the emergency quarantine that's now in place for Itasca County and the current boundaries of that, you can contact our state plant health regulatory official, Mark Abrahamson, at the email below and submit your comments there. I'll leave that up for a second in case you want to write that down or copy and paste that. And so that comment period is open until September 8th when it'll be where the quarantine will be adopted and it will then be official quarantine status. So the rules are the same between emergency and formal quarantine. We're just in that comment period right now. And just to drive the point home, here's a piece of ash wood that has no signs on the outside of it that there's anything in there. Once you peel that bark off, you can see that gallery, and then you even dig in deeper and you can see that J larva that's in its pupal chamber, ready to pupate and turn into the adult beetle at a new location. So this is why we have that massive Don't Move firewood campaign and why you see billboards up often throughout the state in the summer times. Firewood is really the number one way that this insect is being spread long distance. So buy firewood where you're going to burn it is really what the message we're trying to drive home. All right, so now I'm going to touch on management. And so the management I'm going to talk about is really for individual landscape trees. I'll have some information for resources for private woodland owners at the end. That is going to involve different strategies, and you should really be in touch with the local forester to try to identify what would be best for your land. So I'm going to talk about your basic options for managing individual trees in a more landscaped area or in a community. And so our best management practices, you try to avoid doing removal of ash trees, trimming, removal of stumps during when that adult beetle is active. So the active period is considered May 1st through September 30th. We have that date range due to the difference from north to south in Minnesota. So we're trying to encompass the whole state with that date range. Try to avoid doing that work during the active period. The reason for that is you'd rather have emerald ash borer reinfest the same tree when it emerges. If you remove an infested tree during that active period, you're actually pushing those adult beetles that would reinfest that tree out to new trees faster. So it's better off removing that tree once we're in the inactive period in the fall or winter, where you can then remove the tree and destroy that material, getting rid of the emerald ash borer within it. And also, if you're doing removals and you have to move that wood to a new site, you're potentially having emerald ash borer emerge from that wood as it is being moved. So if you have to do work in the summertime, we know people, that's when some work has to be done. Storms happen, things like that, or just the amount of workload that you have. try to either chip that material before you move it, or at least cover the load as you move it down the highway to wherever that wood is going to be processed. Once you become an area that is really heavily infested, it's going to become necessary to do work year round, and you'll have to really be doing work in that active period as well. So if you're in an early infested area or area not known to be infested yet, really try to stick to that rule of trying to avoid doing work on ash in the summer months. But ideally, do that pruning and removal of ash as desired October 1st through April 30th. All right. So when it comes to dealing with this insect, there's really two options. There's removals and treatments. In natural areas where those trees don't pose a hazard to persons or property, they can be left to die and fall apart. But in managed areas where people are, it comes down to removals or treatments. And if you let emerald ash borer go, eventually it's going to kill the tree, and you're going to have to deal with it no matter what, as that tree is going to be dead and hazardous and eventually fall over. So for removals, you can, if you're a community managing a large number of trees, you may want to start doing removals before emerald ash borer is even known to be there. And that would be targeting poor quality trees, poorly sited trees, trying to reduce your overall ash resource just so you're in a better position once it does arrive, and you can start replanting with new species so that you can get something growing and getting to a mature level to help offset that canopy loss. You can target trees for removal once you're in an infested area by looking for trees that are showing that woodpecker damage in the canopy. A tree showing that woodpecker damage is going to have a higher proportion of emerald ash borer than a tree next to it showing no signs. And then obviously you're going to be dealing with dead trees, so removing dead trees in a timely fashion to avoid those risks and hazards, and trying to dispose that wood in an orderly fashion. So trying to do that, October through April, and chipping and burning the wood before you get to the new flight season to try to just kill a portion of that emerald ash borer population. Then there's also insecticide treatments, and so that can be done. That's preventative and therapeutic. So insecticide treatments have to be repeated. It's not something that can just be once and done. And depending on the chemical, it's either every year or every other year for that treatment schedule. You can do treatments before emerald ash borer arrives, is known to be there to protect your tree if you don't want any risk of that tree potentially being infested. And you can also still treat trees after they've been lightly infested with emerald ash borer. Like I mentioned, that rule is, you need to have 70% of a healthy canopy or more for that tree to be a good candidate for treatment. All right, because it's not going to have it come back from that damage. It's going to stop it where it's at. So technically, you can treat a tree up to 50% canopy decline, but a half-dead tree is not going to look very well in the landscape. So some things you want to consider for removal and treatment. How close is emerald ash borer known to be? Is it in your county? Is it in your town? Are you 10, 20 miles away? Once you're within about 10 miles of that generally infested area, that's when you want to consider beginning insecticide treatments, because you never know when it's going to show up in your community due to that cryptic nature of the insect. Once it's found in an area, it's usually already been there for a number of years because it got to a level to where the symptoms were obvious enough for somebody to report it. So typically what we're finding when trees get reported, it's been there at least 5 or 6 years. And now, how healthy is the tree? Is the tree worth treating, worth saving? Is it a high value tree? Is the tree that gives you shade in the summertime? Is it worth putting that extra, investment in to maintain that healthy canopy? Because it takes, 30 plus years to get a tree back to that size where it's giving off that level of benefits. How large is the tree? Like I was just mentioning, smaller trees are easier to cut down and replace to get something back to that size. And then how many trees do you have to deal with? So, if you're a community dealing with this and you have a large number of trees to manage, some communities will decide on treating a number of trees, not necessarily for the life of the tree, but for a certain time frame so that they can deal with removal and replacement more on their own time frame. So with emerald ash borer, that population explodes, and then you have a lot of trees dying in a short amount of time. That can really overwhelm city resources. So sometimes doing treatment in the near term for a certain number of trees to try to slow the rate at which you remove trees in an area is sometimes a good strategy. Those are all things to consider. Treatments, depending on where you're at and how many people are offering it, it can vary. So when you're getting a tree professionally treated, it's what we're seeing. It's usually, around $10 a diameter inch. Communities have contracted with tree care companies to do treatments, then offered a discounted rate to residents. That's very helpful when communities do that, because that ensures that the trees that are being treated by residents are being treated. The trees that are being treated are healthy enough and are being treated properly by professionals that know how to apply the chemical according to the label and the law. And there are homeowner options as well, but it's just important to note that if it's a really large mature tree, we really encourage you to have it professionally treated. The chemicals that are used for that are restricted use pesticides, so you need to be a licensed pesticide applicator to apply it. Stuff that's available to the average homeowner sometimes aren't rated for those really large trees. So if you have a large tree that you want to protect and you want to invest in, we really encourage you to have that professionally treated. And so the systemic insecticides that are available for treatments are very effective as long as they are applied properly and to a healthy enough tree. And so those systemic insecticides will affect the larvae underneath the bark, and they will affect the adult beetles up in the canopy of the tree. So it's important to measure your tree. The treatments need to be repeated. So the chemical typically used by tree care professionals for treating large mature trees is emamectin benzoate. It is a restricted use pesticide, and so that is applied via trunk injections, basically around the root flare, and there will be a number of injection sites depending on the size of the tree that you have. And so those treatments are guaranteed for 2 years, and they're pretty effective in that third year as well. So if you're a community that's looking to treat you have a large number of trees to manage, and you're looking to treat some, you could potentially do a 3-year rotation to try to spread out those resources to protect more trees and slow the rate at which trees are dying. For the average homeowner, if you have an individual tree that you're trying to protect, it is important that you stick to that 2-year window, especially when insect populations are very high, as that population initially builds in an area to avoid any damage in that third year. So follow the label. A large mature tree next to your house that gives you lots of shade, it can be very expensive up front for removal. So depending on where you are and how much it costs to do tree removals, you can treat a tree professionally, a large mature tree, for at least 15 years before you reach that total removal cost, depending on where that tree is situated. So it's something to consider if you have high value trees that you don't want to lose. In addition, treated trees are kind of they're lethal trees. So treated trees will help reduce emerald ash borer populations in a localized area. So it can be a good management strategy to try to delay the rate at which that population builds up and causes widespread mortality. So that's something to consider as well if you're coming up with a management plan for a large number of trees. And just to show you kind of what that tree condition is and that's treatable versus non-treatable, this is an image kind of showing trees side by side. That tree on the left is in good condition. There's less than 10% canopy decline. The tree in the middle is fair condition. It's still treatable. And then the tree on the right is past that point of which it's a good candidate for treatment. All right, then just want to emphasize that management priorities, they change as you move from an uninfested area to a heavily infested area. So the important things to be doing when you're in a not known to be infested area is trying to detect and report infestations. And then if you are, a land manager, you really want to be planning and make sure you have some level of inventory so you know what the resource you have is and what's at stake. It's really hard to plan if you don't know what's out there. Additionally, once you become a generally infested area, you want to treat high value trees, and you want to have a sanitation program where you're dealing with infested trees and dealing with them that are located in areas where they could cause damage to persons or property in a timely fashion. and removing them and destroying that material. And then once your area is very heavily infested and that population exploded and there's widespread tree mortality, you really just want to try to minimize wood movement out of that area and utilize whatever you can with safe disposal or making use of it, wood chips and plantings, and you can use some for lumber. You can do anything that you can to utilize that wood source. Some resources available from DNR Forestry. So we have the DNR Forest Stewardship Program. They'll advise private forest landowners on management for EAB. So they'll look at your site and help you come up with the individual management plan based on your site characteristics. Encourage any private woodland owners to reach out to your local forester. There are cost share opportunities for management plans. And additionally, if you're a community that manages a lot of trees, city or county, DNR Community Forestry has grant opportunities. They're posted at that URL on the page there. There currently isn't any grant opportunities, but there likely will be at some point in this year. And those grant opportunities typically provide funding for whether it be developing an inventory or a management plan or helping with the costs of removal and replanting trees in your community to help deal with the impact of emerald ash borer. And below is as well as the forester contact map, so you can find your community and private forestry contact on that based on that map and the territory that they cover. All right, and then additionally, U of M Extension has some resources for managing ash woodlands. They have different management techniques based on the characteristics of your woodland. So I really encourage you, if you're a private woodland owner, to check that information out. You can see the URL right there, and they have different replacement trees for different types of woodlands that have ash present. So floodplain forests, wet forests, mesic hardwood forests, and peatlands, and fire dependent forests. So kind of can see which ones are going to be more impacted by that, what percentage ash they typically have in those areas. And they all have suggestions for different replacement trees that might work. And lastly, reporting. So now that you know what to look for and how to identify emerald ash borer, if you think you found it, please let us know so we can follow up on it and get some management happening in an area so we can find it as soon as possible. And so we really encourage you to take pictures. Don't just take a picture of a zoomed out picture of a crappy looking ash tree. Please take pictures of the actual damage that you're seeing. So the woodpecker damage, the insect tunneling, the exit holes, any of that, the insect itself. And then report it. You can either report it to a city forester or local designated staff. You can use EdMaps, which you can use to report any invasive species. With EdMaps, if you send in a report, it automatically takes your GPS location and you can attach photos. Those reports will end up in my email inbox where I can then follow up on it. Or most commonly, you can use our Report a Pest. So the Department of Ag's Report a Pest, we have an online form, we have an email, and we have a voicemail. Just please be detailed with the information that you send us so it's easy for follow-up. Take pictures if you can. And provide as much detail as possible when you send those reports. And with that, we can move on to question. That's all I have for you. That is kind of the broad, basic overview of emerald ash borer. Thanks for attending. Once again, this has been recorded, and we will make it available on MDA's YouTube channel within the next week. So I will now go over any questions you might have. And if you think of any questions at a different time, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is on the screen. Shoot me an email, give me a call. Happy to chat with you. Right. Do we have any questions? Right. Well, if there's going to be no questions, that'll be it. If you think of anything, like I said, please feel free to reach out after this is done. Happy to chat and answer any questions you might have. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend.